Good evening. Welcome to another chat here for the Perceptive podcast series here on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. For today's conversation, we are joined not by an indie developer, but by another YouTuber who likes to cover a ton of indie games. Now, our conversation tonight is going to be discussing what it's like to cover the indie market, how things have certainly have changed. I know it's certainly changed for me over the past decade, and even more than that now. So, please welcome to the conversation the YouTuber behind the YouTube channel, Indie Enjoyer. Indie Enjoyer, how are you doing?
Hello, hiya. Thank you for having me, first of all. I'm Indy. You can just call me Indy. I do not put any details of myself yet, at least. I'm the guy behind Indie Enjoyer YouTube channel. I've started a few months ago, actually, so I'm quite new. So I'm interested in the perspectives of someone who's been doing this for over a decade, and then someone who's completely new to doing it, with more passion than before, let's say. I upload daily at the moment. We'll see if I can keep this up, but yeah, so that's me.
That is always the challenge of someone like first starting out on YouTube is, can you do it daily, and how long can you do it before you start to lose your mind over the
Yeah,
process?
there's not many people that do daily content anymore in any genre, really, I would say, on YouTube, because it is difficult.
Yeah, I'm down to 5 videos a week, and even that can be certainly a stretch sometimes. But as soon as we're done recording this, I probably have at least another 2 or 3 more videos I need to edit over this lovely Sunday afternoon as we're recording. But yeah, Indy reached out to me and we decided to set up a conversation. And as everyone knows watching this, I can certainly ramble about indie games and indie dev for hours at hand. And if you are an indie developer looking for someone to talk about their games, or you want to chat about the process, please get in touch with me. And for you, Indy, so I guess for people who aren't familiar with your channel, like what do you focus on?
Um, the first idea which I came with to make the channel is like anything indie games. Like in terms of gameplay, I would say mostly. Not maybe any development behind anything like that. I've never developed a game myself, but I've played tons of games throughout now the channel, but also my life before. I would say it seems that the most common genre that attracts me to my channel where I record is horror, some visual novels, and my favorite one I would say is deck builder roguelikes. It's quite a specific one, but it's very popular, I would say, now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess I guess that takes me to a really interesting question for you because, again, like for people watching, a lot of what I will do a lot of these interviews and stuff like that, I'm talking with people who are in the industry in some capacity, of course, lots of developers. But it's rare for me to kind of sit down and chat with someone else who's covering games on YouTube. So, as you said, like you just started the channel a few months ago, and I'm sure you've been playing indie games for far longer than that. And when it comes to, I guess, like looking at, I guess, like game covers these days, like as you said, you mentioned between visual novels, horror, and deck builders. When you're deciding which games to cover, like I guess, like what attracts your eye? Because again, there are plenty of deck builders, visual novel, and horror games. So I guess how do you single out which ones you want to look at?
So at the moment, I'm debating as well. Like I'm at the moment of experimenting, but I think half of it is like what there's three parts to it, I would say. So one part is what I would enjoy. I don't want to cover games that I would not enjoy. I think that would not be enjoyable to watch either. So I think that's pointless. Second would be new games, because I think I've realized that when I record an older game, for example, like a year old, and it was never like very popular to begin with. Let's say it had up to 10 reviews on Steam, for example. Uh, that is not really discoverable. So especially for a new channel like me, it's kind of not worth it to some degree to do that. And the third one would be the games that I think would be interesting to watch. So sometimes I might play a game that is maybe not as fun to watch as comparatively to play it. But then I would do the opposite. So I would do something that like for sure will be more enjoyable to watch, just to make sure that there's more retention, there's more views and such, to just grow my channel a bit more.
And that's always like that rub when it comes to like doing YouTube in this respect. Because again, like my channel is certainly like I guess I'm still considered like a lower mid-sized channel, and I do unfortunately tend to struggle when it comes to covering a lot of niche games because again, if it's a niche game, it's not really being propelled by the algorithm. And conversely, of course, is I want to cover so many smaller and kind of more, hidden gem style indie games that it's always that kind of like give and take that I have to deal with. And it's one of those things that it's like that catch-22 that if you're a super huge YouTuber, your name will of course carry a lot of your videos. But conversely, at that point, it becomes harder for, a super large channel to justify reviewing an indie game that has maybe, 5 or 0 reviews on Steam.
Yeah, I would say like it's kind of a trade-off because if you're a large YouTuber, then no matter what you put out will be watched essentially. But if it's a game that maybe doesn't fit with your audience or it's just not as fun to watch, for example, that might be negative for your channel. So I think there's a higher risk as well for a person who has just more following covering games that are smaller, for example. Because I've played games that were you could almost just say they're bad, like they just look unfinished, for example, and such, and I will still upload it because I think it's, for example, it has potential, or it's just something that I already recorded, so might as well put it out. And for me, it's riskless essentially. It's only an opportunity to randomly get discovered. But for a larger YouTuber, that would be negative. I think that could be a negative thing for the channel.
And like given like the nature for a lot of these smaller games, there's always that I guess like from your perspective, have you seen like any games that you've covered or any games that either you just like play on your own that didn't really have a following but then kind of like blew up you like a few months or a few years like later?
It's hard to say. I would say it's kind of I'm never early to the party, let's say. It's
Mhm.
very hard to that would be perfect, right? Because if you record a game that is not popular yet, but then it blows up, then there's a higher chance that people looking for the game on YouTube for the gameplay of it, for walkthroughs, for tutorials, will find your channel, will find you on video and watch it, right? Because you've got it recorded already.
Mhm.
Compare it to someone who records a video because it's popular, right? So I would say, for example, a game that I think did well for me with that was Psychosis Remastered. For example, I did the whole playthrough of it because it's quite short.
Mhm.
So I think that was, for example, the example of which was I could see that it's like it's not a new game because it's a remaster, but on the other hand, the original game was never that popular to begin with, and then it started getting traction like some time ago. So I think I'm flowing with it upwards, kind of thing. But it's hard to get that right. I think it takes a lot of time and effort to watch the market, kind of like just browsing the games on Steam, looking which game has a lot of, for example, reviews, Steam curator reviews, things like that, especially on the upcoming games.
And like from like a developer standpoint, it is just like impossible to try and like predict what the market is going to be 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, or we're recording this one or a day before September of 2025, and about a week or so ago, Silk Song got its massive announcement, and that has just completely upended like the state of indie game marketing for like the next like 4 to 5 weeks.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah. We can see through the years. I've got a list on my screen for some of the games that, for example, influenced pretty much like they were pretty much a trendsetter in a way. Like when they came out, they were
Mhm.
huge. Everyone was talking about them. Everyone was recording. Even if you weren't like full on gaming YouTube channel, people would still record it just because it was worth it. Like that's like that kind of level of hugeness of a game. So, for example, some of those games would be Amnesia: The Dark Descent.
Yep.
That's 2010, so that's quite a long time ago. Then 2 years later, we had like Slender. So that's like from the horror games. We had PT in 2014, for example. So these were like huge horror games. Outlast as well. For example, in more recent times, deck builder roguelikes, that's I think genre that became huge. I don't think that genre existed at all like 10 years ago. I don't remember any games really that were that style, or they were smaller probably. So for example, in recent years we had Slay the Spire, we had Balatro. Those two were the main ones, I think, which kind of pioneered that gameplay and just showed everyone that those genres can be fun and like but no one expected that probably. I mean, sure, there was always a crowd for like deck kind of games or like card games, but no one would thought that if you put cards into deck building into like dungeon crawler, for example, that would work so well. So that's why we see like Slay the Spire and Balatro having like 100,000 reviews on Steam, for example, and people still playing it to this day.
And one of my earlier design books I wrote was on deck builders, and the deck building genre did exist before Slay the Spire. There have been like very small cases, but none of them really like I guess like quote unquote broke containment in the same way as Slay the Spire did. And I mean, you can look at even something more recent with Balatro that there were like I watch a lot of like the Mario like Kaizo community, Mario speedrunner style YouTubers over the years, and when Balatro blew up, they were even playing that game on their streams and channels.
I'm not surprised because generally Balatro, I've played it for I don't know how long, but yeah, probably I think I've racked up 3-digit number of hours on it. Slay the Spire for sure, and I think Balatro same. It's so weird, right? Like a random game coming out and just blowing everyone, and then everyone wants to copy them as well, essentially.
Yep.
And that's why we have influx of a genre, right? Because you've got a blueprint from this developer that showed you that this works, by the way. If you do this in your own style, it will probably do well, kind of thing.
Yeah, but unfortunately, what we've seen, at least from like my perspective, is that most of these games just never like reach that same level. Even something like Monster Train, which I preferred Monster Train to the original Slay the Spire, although it's gonna be really hard to decide when Slay the Spire 2 comes out. But you can see like the gulf between like the number of reviews on Steam between the two games. And it is like rare, I think a lot of people think about how much like that second or third or fourth game will do compared to, the one that blew it all up.
Yeah, it is quite random sometimes. I mean, it's not like just copy a good game and that game will do good, right? I mean, it has to be unique. It needs some unique mechanics to its own, life, because then it's like, what's the point of playing this game? Just play the original that it was inspired by. It has to be somewhat interesting, somewhat that has to be like a little bit of story. Like, for example, Balatro doesn't have a story per se, but using the poker mechanics, right, that everyone knows about, and then putting it in that unique visual style of like VHS plus like slowly moving liquid behind in the background, like that's something that Balatro did that made it unique. Those two things, and then that's why it blew out as well, probably, I would say. Because then I played games which had, for example, that liquid moving effect in the background as well. I was like, okay, that's from Balatro, essentially. Like, it's pretty much 1-to-1, even though if the game had some unique thing to it and it was good, like I enjoyed it. But then it's like, yeah, I can see the influence of Balatro in it, for example. And same with Slay the Spire. For example, the recent game would be Conquer the Lands, I believe. Conquer Lands, yeah, that game. So that game, I talk about it in the video. It has pretty much 1-to-1 elements UI of Slay the Spire, except for the times where it has its unique mechanics. Then it has to be changed. It just looks different. Mm-hmm. But for everything else, it has exact same as Slay the Spire, pretty much.
Yeah. And with just like so many games being released, it's, at least from my perspective, it's like it's near impossible to try and cover them all. And
it's impossible. It's not possible.
I know. And I think that's like always that challenge when it comes to like being like a YouTuber or being someone who covers these games is that it really is impossible to kind of, I guess, say that you can cover everything. Because even if you do just focus on one genre, you're still getting so many of these games coming out each month that it still becomes impossible to try and cover them. And then you always run into that situation of, you know, can I cover this game in time? And if not, like, if the game doesn't do well, more than likely people aren't going to watch your video. And if they're not going to watch your video, then you're not really going to be able to do much for that game, to begin with.
Yeah, I think if you do that kind of strategy, you're kind of like a news channel. Like if you are
Mm-hmm.
too late to cover it, then it's gone. Like that opportunity is kind of gone. But even then, so for example, you cover every game that comes out in the genre, but then there will be like some niche random game on itch.io that you just
Mm-hmm.
didn't find, and it's like, well, you try to be the person who covers every single one, and it's just, yeah, unlucky, let's say.
Yeah. And I mean, like, for the people watching, this, like, the people from my channel, they know that I cover at least 6 indie games a week through videos, plus the reviews, plus the interviews. And you can still, like, even with all the games I'm wired into, it's very easy to find, like, a new indie game or one that's come out that I probably have never even heard of. And then I can stump someone with the other, like, 30 that I've played over, like, the month.
Yeah. It's hard deciding which game you want to cover if you don't do that sometimes, because
Mhm.
the way I find the games to cover is mainly scrolling down through the new releases on Steam. I think that's my favorite way to do it. Although it's like you skip a lot of games.
Yeah.
Like I will be honest, I skip like 30 games to find one which is like I even check first as well. Like I actually press into it and oh, that looks interesting. That might be interesting. And even then, sometimes you read the description or you look at the visuals and it's like that's not gonna make it, I would say. So it's quite competitive. That's one for indie
Mhm.
devs to first of all be seen, and then for the YouTubers, it's hard to decide which one as well to cover really.
Mhm. And like I have reviews like Steam store pages, so I do a lot of analysis on that respect, and especially for like covering a lot of the festivals. I guess that is one like the biggest change I think that's really like taken root in like the last like 5 to 7 years compared to back in the 2010s. Was there were no such thing as Steam festivals or any kind of like these mass market events that you could like uh pull or consolidate a lot of these indie games together to.
Yeah, actually, I haven't noticed that. Like the festivals did come out of nowhere on Steam to
Mhm.
some degree, but I think it's a good thing. It
Yeah.
kind of gives the chance for small to medium developers to show their games. I think, for example, one of the devs that are making great games, which I think more people should follow, is the guys. It's a Polish team. It's a Polish team, but I will need to find the name for them because I do not remember at the moment. But they've got few games. For example, I think what was the art game, which is like a horror walking simulator,
Was it
which was
Layers of
popular.
Fear?
Layers of Fear, yeah. So guys behind Layers of Fear,
Mhm.
for example, they've got quite a few games that are good. And for example, so Layers of Fear has like 1,000 reviews, for example, which is like a medium-sized game. It's quite good for just watching on Steam, right?
Mhm.
So Bluebird Team, that's their name, and they are releasing Chronos, which will be another probably good game. But I think, for example, that they have become bigger because they remade Silent Hill 2. They are the guys behind the remake of Silent Hill 2. So, for example, but Silent Hill is like the massive game from a massive company. So it's like they still needed that help kind of from something bigger to be like very visible, I would say. Even though their games are great. Observer, for example, is a great game, I would say. I haven't played Medium, but I've heard it's decent, for example. So yeah.
And like with something like a Bluebird team, like Layers of Fear when it first came out, like I know a lot of people have kind of ragged on them for kind of like all the like tropes of like jump scare based horror. And it took them a few years to kind of like grow beyond that. I know the Medium, I think that was the other game they did, was got some pretty interesting reviews. I know some people were very polarized by the ending. But a lot of that challenge has been just like for some of these smaller developers is like surviving long enough to get that game that becomes a hit.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, the first Layers of Fear, as I am checking now, is from 2016, and that's the
Mm-hmm.
era where Outlast was still big,
Yep.
Amnesia was still big.
Mm-hmm.
The Red Barrels, I believe, is the team behind Amnesia. There's something Barrels for sure, the name of that company. So like in those times, that's what people wanted anyway. For example, but obviously because of the influx of this type of game, people were tired of just jump scares, and then it kind of changed into more atmospheric games, right, for horror, or just completely random projects that were different. For example, Doki Doki Literature Club in 2017. That's also, I think, invented a genre on its own of like hidden horror behind cute or chill things, for example. So it's always, those trends are always mutating and changing with a
Mm-hmm.
new additions to just the market, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So having like older games and then being, for example, remade, because that's what happened, I think, in Layers of Fear, because the old one is 2016 and the new one is like 2023, I think. They also had to adapt to that, for example.
And I guess like another like point about like how much things have really changed has been we've seen at least in like the last like 5 years a lot more like mods or like games that started out as a mod and then becoming like a full release, getting more of a public eye to it. Like such as like a lot of like the Z Doom or GC Doom games. What was the other one I was thinking of? RPG Maker being another big example. Like we were talking like covering indie games like 10, 13 years ago, most people were not looking at RPG Maker games unless your channel like was dedicated specifically to that. And then we have stuff like Fear and Hunger, of course, Undertale, and what was the other one? I know there's a few other major ones. Look Outside, I think, was also RPG Maker that kind of like is like showing people that you can do a lot with this engine other than just copying Final Fantasy for the umpteenth time.
Right, I didn't know actually that those games were made in RPG Maker, because that's what you mean. Yeah, that's what you said. They don't look like they were made in RPG Maker, kind of like all the Final Fantasy clones and such. When you see that, you're like, okay, that was probably made in RPG Maker. But
Mm-hmm.
with Undertale, Fear and Hunger, it's you can see it, but not as much in some other random games, I would say. But I think before, the RPG Maker probably wasn't maybe as available for people. I guess like it was probably not as popular to make games with RPG Maker, I would say. I'm not sure. That's just my opinion from nowhere. I've got no experience in that. I've got no idea. I never talked to indie devs. But I think there's more RPG Maker games now than they were 10, 15 years ago, probably.
Mm-hmm. And also, as a point of clarification, I was incorrect. Undertale was Game Maker, not RPG Maker. The Game
Right.
Maker is another one that has also been around for quite a bit, and it's kind of been like these like smaller or more focused game engines have been a really great way for developers to make their games. For visual novel side, I'm sure you're well aware of Twine that has been used for many of the visual novel games that have been out there.
I don't know any programs, to be honest. I know one which is called Sprite, which is a sprite and pixel art maker, but it's not for games specifically. There's no coding in it. It's just visuals, really.
Mhm.
Um, I think I've heard the name Twine before, but I didn't know it's a visual novel maker, essentially.
Mm.
Um, I wonder what the Team Salvaro made Doki Doki in, to be honest, because I just don't know. But
And it's one of those things that like for someone like me who talks to like so many developers that I've had to like look the stuff up and try to like keep it a mental note for it. And it is that kind of like interesting aspect when it comes to like talking with developers and trying to learn more about the design side, at least from my perspective. And I guess like with like choosing or with the games that you've been trying to cover or the games that you have been covering on your channel, with like smaller titles, I guess like what do you look for in indie game that like makes you want to cover or makes you want to talk about it?
Well, it depends because every genre also gives a different experience and feeling, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, a horror game can be very boring or like jump scare infested, and you could cover that, I guess, like jump scare infested game, but you want something more to it in today's world, I would say, because the jump scare era is kind of gone probably, and it's left in 2012, I suppose, with Amnesia and stuff. Um, so I don't know. This if it sounds unique to some degree, that's one thing I really look at. Like if it's just something different, but it's not like a random idea that it's bad. So for example, it's unique in a good way, not unique in like some very random, obscure way that I can tell is probably won't work. Like maybe I would try it and I would be wrong, but 99% chance like it wouldn't. Um, or like there's not much to it. So for example, I've seen a game being like you're a rock, like or something. Like I don't know, you just a rock on a background, on a flat background. I don't know if it was a clicker or something, but it's like, well, I'm not gonna cover that because there's nothing to it. The video would be like 3 minutes long, and yeah, that's just pointless. But for example, with the games like Petrichor, I've covered Petrichor recently, and that game, for example, it's a dungeon crawler horror where you literally crawl through the caves. And for example, I've never seen mechanic where you cannot go like where you cannot turn. It's like as if there was actual body inside those caves. And for example, in some spaces you cannot turn. So you have to be careful of that, for example. Like I have not seen a game like that before. And also it has its own map system where you have to draw your own map as you explore, which is actually very difficult when I play the game. Like I kind of gave up on it like very fast because I was like, okay, that takes a lot of concentration to do that correctly and not make myself lost in that map. So for example, those two mechanics made Petrichor like straight away. I was like, okay, I'm sold on it. Like I'm gonna cover that one for sure. So that's like a very good example of what I want to cover. But obviously, there's some games which are less unique, and I just play them for the genre. So, for example, Soba's Gunpo was incremental game about a cat that was shooting guns, pretty much, which is like kind of quirky idea, but it's pretty much just incremental game with upgrades. So it's like a basic mechanic. But then it has its something unique on its own. And it's like, okay, I will cover it, but it's not the same level as like Petrichor, for example. If I see a game like Petrichor, like I'm 100% in, and I just buy, download, play, record straight away, pretty much as soon as possible.
And like finding like those hidden gems is of course like one of the big things I always love to do here with the channel. I'm sure as you're just going Petrichor that you like to do as well. That it's always great to find that game that just like by checking out the demo, it like raises your eye that yeah, this is interesting. I want to cover more of it. And there have been a lot of these indie games, at least like here on my channel, that always like I'll just like find like some demo or I'll hear about from a person that kind of thing on social media that we go like wow like I definitely want to play more of this one.
Yeah, and I think those are the games which are gonna be like bigger with time. That's what we've talked about like in this talk before, where it's like you might be early to the hype of the game if you spot it out quickly. I think, for example, maybe it's a genre in development now that is getting more popular. I don't know what to call it, but it's like horror door games, which is like you're inside a space and then you decide if you let things or people into the house. So, for example, No, I'm Not Human demo. That game is coming out tomorrow, I think. That is kind of huge in a way. Like everyone was talking about it, people were recording. I think that's a good game from the demo at least, but I think the full game will be great as well. So, Mycopsychosis is the same type of game, for example, and there was a recent popular horror called Who's at the Door, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And that game, for example, was also popularized by Penguins, right? Charlie, that guy, because that he said that it's the first game in a while that startled him. So, and he was like known for not jumping at jump scares and such. So that genre, I think, for example, is that kind of example. Yeah.
I mean, we can even talk about uh, this whole like gambling, not gambling thing with all the games like trying to copy like Balatro, or there's like this the whole thing with like buckshot roulette with like combining gambling in that respect, but you're dealing with the idea of Russian roulette.
Yeah, the gambling sort of randomness games that's been becoming more and more popular because of Balatro, but also just you could say its roots are in the deck building roguelikes because it is also sort of random. That's the point. Like you get a random
Mm-hmm.
run every single time, right? So I think we've gotten more multiplayer ones. I think Bookshot Roulette has a multiplayer mode now, for example, because people requested it so much. We've had a game called Liar's Bar, I believe, which is 4-player, kind of, sort of in a setting of gamble and like card games, but it's also like kind of random because you have to lie essentially to win. Like your odds are against everyone essentially. So I think we have a lot of those games, yeah, now, and I think that's the. It seems like people like gambling. To be honest, that's what it comes down to.
Mm-hmm. And it's like one thing that I've always been kind of like puzzled about. I'm just curious if what you think about that we had like that very brief period when like Among Us like blew up the whole like social deduction genre, and so many people were copying that game. So many people were trying to mirror that, and a lot of that has just like really like disappeared. I'm sure there are people still playing those games, still making them, but in terms of like the mainstream attention, that has just all but disappeared. And like the only times we really hear about now is if there's like a new update or some kind of promotion going on with Among Us.
Yeah, I mean, I think we know why that happened because there's
Mm-hmm.
only one reason why Among Us was discovered in the first place, because the hype for it was 2 years after its release, because its release was in 2018 and it became popular in 2020. And what happened in 2020? COVID, basically. No one could leave the house, right? Everyone was inside. And so streamers and people just randomly found a cool, quirky mafia game, pretty much, because that's what it is. Uh, but it's simple. It's easy to learn. There's pretty much no learning curve to it. It's cartoonish. It's good for kids. Like it fits all the categories to be a big thing at that time. And so that's why even now, like even Among Us is not that big anymore. I would say. Like I haven't checked the stats of player base, but I'm sure it's dropped like more than 50% since like 2020 for sure. Like I don't have to check that to be sure of it. I would say. That's because, well, we can do things again outside. The COVID is no more, essentially. So those smaller games which copied Among Us, they are for sure dead, and they are never resurrecting, essentially.
It's always that kind of like difficulty for a lot of these developers in terms of if they see a game like Balatro or Among Us or Getting Over It, and like the more just kind of like shifts in that direction, do you try to release a game that's different that may not get any attention because everyone's playing that, or do you try to make something in that genre, but then you of course run that risk that everyone will be just completely dead tired of it by the time it comes out?
Um, I would say it's if you have a good idea that is influenced. The key word is influenced, not copied, not stolen, influenced by that game. Because I'm sure that Getting Over It was in some way influenced by Happy Wheels, for example. Happy Wheels was the first game which was like physics based. I think that was like so popular. So that was like a flash game that everyone played on YouTube. At least it was popular in Poland, in Polish YouTube, I remember. But that's like 2011, so it still was like 7 years before Getting Over It came out. And then obviously we had a lot of it. We had like Pushing It with Sisyphus, difficult game about climbing, vaulting over it. A lot of games like that because, well, I think that's also because it's like a random thing again. So who would think that a game about a guy inside a cauldron swinging a hammer going as high as possible would be so popular. Like, I would never guess that, in my opinion. Like, that's if it was like 10 reviews on Steam for its eternity, you wouldn't be surprised, kind of thing. And yet here it is, right? So it's always players dictating what they want. But sometimes the players, I think, they don't know what they want. Like, it's just sometimes such a huge choice of games that sometimes will be something so different, so unique, but also so fun that suddenly it will catch on very quickly. And I think Getting Over It was that kind of game. And Among Us, kind of, but also with help of COVID, obviously, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as we're recording this again, like we are just a few months away from the end of 2025, and this year has definitely been an interesting one in terms of kind of I guess like this I guess like push and pull of like big names appearing out of nowhere or big names blowing up. We had, I think, like probably the biggest name which is like coming out of nowhere of 2025 would be something like Claire Obscure, Exposition 33, and I guess like it's going to be really interesting. And I guess like that's an interesting question for you as someone who's also covering indie games. Is that it feels like, at least like watching the indie scene, that this has not been, I think, like a really like good time in terms of being profitable when it comes to making an indie game, unless it does have that blow up nature to it. And at least from my side, I've been seeing a lot more indie devs focusing on like more like smaller, more contained experiences. And I guess like for you, like, are you noticing something similar with like the games that you're covering or the games that you're seeing?
Um, I would say that's it's difficult to say because with so many genres and such, and with so many sizes of indie games. Because if we think about it, the Clair Obscur is technically an indie game, right? I think it's their first game, so by definition, I think it's like technically an indie game. But it's like that's a triple A level of game. That's not an indie
Mhm.
game in original sense of when people talk about indie games. So I still think it's about idea most and for all. And I don't think anyone should make indie games with money in mind as their first thing. Like a chance of you being the next Among Us or Getting Over It or Terraria, for example, it's so low. It's just do the thing you want to do. Like if you want to make a game about cats and it being, for example, a horror, like do it. If it people play it, people will play it. If not, you at least have something to show for yourself that you did something right, I suppose. uh,
Mhm.
you put unnecessary risk on yourself if you, for example, are like, okay, I'm going full time into indie game dev. It's like, sure, if that's your passion in life, but it's very risky, I would say, if you throw away something already established in your life, for example, like a career for that. I think it's a very risky endeavor, and I would not recommend it myself personally.
And I think that's another like really like big change in terms of like indie dev from when I first started doing this back in like 2012 to where we're at now. Is that in the early 2010s, quitting your job to become a full time indie developer was kind of seen as, yeah, let's do it. It's all great and fun, and we can surely make that game in like 1 to 3 years. And a lot of those cases, it just did not happen. And like to keep this idea of like very like smaller, more focused game dev, a lot of like the newer developers I've been like interviewing or seeing have been wanting to like either do a game part time, or again they're focusing on like very smaller like game dev cycles. Like for a lot of developers I've interviewed in 2025 in particular, most of them have been saying like, yeah, my games may be like a year, maybe like 2 to 3 years max. Whereas if we were talking like 10 years ago or even like 7 years ago, a lot of developers are just like, yeah, this is going to be like an 8 to 10 year long project. And we really aren't, I think, seeing as many devs like try and do that these days.
I think there's few different reasons for it. One is probably costs, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, if you have a team of people, let's say, and they either have to be willing to work for nothing for that long,
Yep.
or you have to pay them for that long. There's only two options. And paying someone for 8 years without guaranteed return and pretty much sinking all that money and time is very risky, and not many people are willing to take that risk. Example of a game which was developed for that long would be No Man's Sky, right?
Yep.
That game, and even then, they said they developed it for 8 to 10 years. I think it came out and it was underwhelming for people because everything looked good. UI was good. You had planets, everything, but the game was just boring. Like there was nothing to do after a certain point. That's how I remember what people said about it when it came out. Now I'm sure they've updated it and there's more things to do in it, but at the time it was like kind of a sad thing almost. Like some people laughed at them, obviously. Some people were like, well, that sucks because they probably waited that long. So I think that's a good example of when people look at developing a game for more than like 5 years. It's like that might happen, by the way. You might could just completely fail. Like, so that's very risky endeavor. So I think that's why we have a lot of games that are developed in a shorter span of time.
If you make that game in a shorter span of time, it also means that if it does fail, you're not, losing your house in the process. And for a while, I guess, like, for, like, what we're seeing with, like, a lot of the indie developers, like, getting into the space today versus, like, 10, 15 years ago, we've been seeing more developers, I think, really trying to, I guess, like, do what they can to keep things as sustainable as possible. And I guess, like, from your own perspective, any, like, smaller or, like, kind of, like, niche indie games that you've played that kind of, like, went that route of, being, like, a very highly focused, but still, like, very, like, short or minimal experience?
I think from time to time we get games which are like an hour long, 2 hours long, and they are great, right? And I think sometimes that's even for the benefit of the game, because, for example, horror games, when horror game starts to get too long, it gets boring, I would say. Like that's a big part when developing a horror game, and as a horror player, I would say that's a big thing. For example, Alan Wake, first one, which is a great game, but at the last 2-3 hours, I was like, okay, like I want to finish this game. I want the ending at this point. Like it was going around shooting a few zombies and then some dialogue, for example, and I was like, okay, I've been doing this for like 10 hours or something. Like, can I finish, please? So, for example, I think that's the big thing. But I would say that in today's world, so 2025 and a few years back, we see that people go for replay value a lot. And we see that in obviously the deck builder, roguelikes, and dungeon crawlers, but we also see it in things like Phasmophobia and that kind of genre of games, like Repo, right? Like Peak, which is not horror, but still a multiplayer game to have fun, and you can just play it over and over pretty much every day, and it's gonna be fresh to some degree. Especially, for example, Peak. Like Peak managed to, I think, crack the code with this because they've got randomly generated map every single day, and I think that's something that will keep players for a long time. Compared to something like Phasmophobia, which, if you know mechanics, if you know the ghosts, after some time, you just speedrun. I've seen some good Phasmophobia players, and I'm like, how are they having fun? They know where the ghost is and who it is in like 30 seconds. Like, what's the point anymore?
Yeah. And it's where we've seen, like, from, like, the game coloring side, that there's a lot more channels these days where it seems like there's a strategy around dedicating yourself to a specific genre or to a specific game. When I was covering, or when I was doing research for, like, my RTS book, I found channels that just cover RTS competitive matches. When I've been covering for my next book on, like, Cozy and Wholesome, I discovered, like, the whole, like, I guess, like, microverse of, like, Stardew Valley creators who, like, that's their whole thing, or like Stardew Valley, Cozy Wholesome, that kind of style. And, like, and from that perspective, like, that particular aspect of game coverage, I think, has really become, I'm not going to say viable for everyone, obviously, but it's become an option, I guess, like, to kind of go with, like, the mark or go with the flow.
Yeah, I would say that's the go-to. Really, I've made a choice of like I said my thing will be indie games. Like I've separated myself to the indie sort of area away from AAA. Even if I enjoy them, if even if I play them on my own sometimes, like Doom. I love Doom series, for example, but that's AAA. I'm not gonna cover that. Um, but then yeah, people will go even more niche because well, YouTube is saturated. That's the thing. Everyone
Hmm.
is. There's no pretty much like a very unique thing in gaming you can do now. I would say it's very difficult to find something like that. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, people tend to niche very closely into one thing. I'm sure some people do only things like personality-based gaming, which would be like playing Peak with same group of people and then playing like Phasmophobia, like those co-op friend kind of group games. So that's like another even category, right? But yeah, I would say that's the two main that people go for.
And multiplayer has been, I think, another, like, not just like an aspect from like the YouTube covering side, but of course from a game development side. Because again, we mentioned stuff like Phasmophobia, Among Us, and that kind of respect. And there's been a lot of developers kind of like chasing that particular market. What was it? Lethal Company, I believe, was the big one that blew up, I think, last year, the year before that. Of if we can get like a game that's about like four people just completely messing around, not only does it become really good fodder for YouTube and stream content, but it basically becomes like free advertising for that developer of look at these people having this like wacky time with our strange game.
Yeah, that's a big thing actually, which is like kind of a side thing. Like probably people don't talk about it as much, but it's like that makes sense, right? First of all, you get four times the sales, right? Because you get four copies of the game. So that's one thing. Because you're not gonna play Peak on your own. Well, you can, but like not
Mm-hmm.
many people will. You usually it's gonna be two, three, four, or more friends even
Yeah.
playing the game. So in terms of finances, that's good for the dev. The second would be like it's just more fun playing with friends, right? Most
Mm-hmm.
of the time. And I think we are past the era where multiplayer PvP games are sort of in their peak. I think people tend to go more for multiplayer, but with their own friends and like, you versus AI or bots or whatever, like versus the game itself. Obviously, games such as League, Valorant, all those big games, they are still big and they are still like growing even. But I think people are kind of tired sometimes of the, for example, toxicity of the multiplayer games and such things. So they tend to be like, well, I want to play with someone. I want some, or at least like, for example, some competitive feeling, but I don't want to experience that kind of thing, for example. So then you can play games with your friends that are against each other, right? These ones are co-op, right? Like you're not against each other. But there are games, for example, you could play Dead by Daylight, like 1v4, right? So with 5 players, you play together essentially. Or even if you play with four and then one of you just gets into the role of a killer, right? Then
Mm-hmm.
it's against each other. One game which I've played a lot with my friends would be Pummel Party, which is like a board game where you walk around the board. Um, you move with dice, so you roll the dice and then you can move the X amount of steps essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And after each turn, there would be like a mini game to play against each other for points and who goes first in the next round, basically. So that kind of game, I think, is sort of thing that people look for. That or either something like Phasmophobia, Repo, Peak, kind of goofy, do things together kind
Mm-hmm.
of thing. I would say that's the main genre that people like to play these days, except for obviously like single player games, but that's like huge on its own. So.
And like with like from like the YouTuber or like content creator perspective, it does become like this very like as we said, it becomes this very much like its own like microcosm of like creators and their friends playing like specific genre or a specific game that it then becomes I think a little bit trickier for someone new coming in to try and do something in that space. Again, like, as I said, when I was covering or I was looking up like a lot of like the Stardew Valley, whenever I like looked up like a Stardew Valley video, it was like either like one I kept seeing like the same like 5 names popping up, or like collaborations between like so and so playing Stardew Valley in some capacity. And from like that perspective, it's a lot. It goes back to what we were saying earlier, like that catch 22 of trying to cover like a smaller indie game. Is that on one hand you could be like the first one to talk about it, but on the other hand, no one could be talking about it compared to again watching someone play a mod version of Stardew Valley or watching them play Among Us or Phasmophobia.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that. I think with covering games that are multiplayer, it's also a bit higher ceiling to get into because, well, you
Mm-hmm.
need actually a group of friends that will constantly actually record with you and do it.
Mm-hmm.
Not everyone wants to commit themselves to that. Not everyone wants to be online, like on YouTube, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So compared to someone like me who just plays single player games, well, I can record 7 videos in one day if I want to.
Yeah.
But if you are a group of people playing a game, well, you need each other. Like you, even if there's one person recording and everyone else is sort of like a guest, then that's still you cannot record if they are not there. So the ceiling of getting into that space is a bit higher. And then I think the social parasocial aspect of feeling like you're part of that group when you watch it is also helping with growth of that channels, I would say.
And it's always and like I think that's a really interesting point about like sustaining like your coverage in this respect. That like again like for someone like me, like part of the one like rare advantage I have is that because I play and cover so many indie games, there's never really like a chance of me getting bored or falling to that rut of I'm just going to play 80 different platformers and that's going to be it. Or I'm going to play nothing but shooters or nothing but strategy games. And being able to have that variety has helped. And when you're just like covering like one specific genre, and again, like this is something that I don't really have to deal with, but I guess like for yourself who's like focusing down. I guess like what do you do, or do you like have any thoughts in terms of like not like becoming, I guess like falling into a rut of just like playing like the same kind of genre, same kind of gameplay day in and day out.
I've never locked myself into one thing from the start, even though my content is kind of same. Like it's either playthrough or trying out the demo of the game. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of the only 2 things I do at the moment. But I'm thinking about trying stuff of like having way more editing in my
Mm-hmm.
videos, like being more snappy. Because for now they don't require a lot of editing. I'm gonna be honest; they are mainly just playing from start to finish or from start to certain point, and just some editing to make the audio right and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. But so that's one thing I would say. Um, could you repeat that question again? Because I've got.
I guess it like for you in terms of like focusing on specific genres, like anything that you're trying to do or anything that you're seeing to like kind of avoid like falling to a rut
Oh
of
right,
just
right.
playing like the same thing over and over again.
So yeah, so that's why I've made the decision of doing indie games. Like that's very
Mm-hmm.
broad genre. Like it's not even a genre, it's just a broad category of games. So in this way I can like do different games within that. So I do horror, I do
Mm-hmm.
dungeon crawlers, right? Roguelikes, visual novels, like and I can add more to it if I want to. So I guess I want it to be specific enough that if a person searches for something related to indie games, they will stick around, but also not limit myself to be doing only one thing. Because, for example, I could do League of Legends content. Like, I've been League player for like 15 years, for example, and I probably could do League content, but that's, I don't think I would last for longer than X amount of time if I did only that as a content, I would say.
I'm trying to think if there's anything else like from my perspective. I guess from your side, any like questions you want to ask me, or any topics regarding covering any games.
Um, sure. Since you are talking a lot to indie devs, which is
Mhm.
another side which I've never even smelled, let's say, not nor like touched or seen. Um, Well, I think it would be very cool to talk to some of the like developers that are making cool games, like Bluebird Team or the Red Barrels. That would be great.
Mhm.
So when you talk to these devs, what's the one thing that gets you like maybe not anymore because you've done it for so long, but what's the one thing that like surprises you of like something about the development of the indie games or like the ideas of how they come up with them or just
Mhm.
anything that a person like me wouldn't think of it myself that that's what they do or that's how they think or anything like that.
I think the one that's always like surprising or interesting is when it comes to like the background for any developers. Like I have interviewed people who were like used to do acting, who were investment bankers, who went to film school, and now they're trying to make an indie game. Like it's always like fun to like just see like where all these different sources and inspirations come from that then again get put into their respective games that leads to all this variety that we've been talking about and covering.
So there is sort of a thing then that, for example, let's say a person was in like an acting role or something in their life, and then they make a game, and there is you can see some sort of things they've learned there that they put into the game. Is that like
Mm-hmm.
a common thing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that has like always been like one of the best things about chatting with developers is that it then leads to these games being just being like wildly different. You can have five different developers making a platformer, and they can play nothing like each other. Anything else from your side? And then if not, I guess we can go into kind of like a final set of questions or wrap up.
Right. I think that's oh, just a random one. For example, what would be your favorite few games from the past? I don't know, 5 years. Like, what do
Hmm.
you think was not maybe not influential, but also could be like games that were like if no one ever heard about them, they should like learn about them maybe or play them or watch them or anything like something
Hmm.
like special. Like
Hmm.
so, can you give me like a few examples of those games?
Hmm. I think the two that I played the most that I really loved, one was At Libra Revision that came out in 2022. Very much like kind of like side-scrolling action RPG style, made by a developer. They just use like as many like free and public assets as they could, and it turned out to be just as a very amazing game. It's like such like it's like one of those games I would describe as like such a me game that it just like hits like every like checkpoint or checkbox that I want to play. Another one that I really enjoyed from. Let me make sure I get the date right because remember these years has been like the hardest part. Um,
Yeah.
let's see. Make sure, yeah, from 2023, I was off by a year. Final Profit, which again, going back to like how much you can get out of using these free and available engines, made sole developer, I believe, although I'm not sure if it is sole developer or not, but made entirely an RPG maker as a shop sim. That, as someone who loved like the old school like Racketeer and that style, the game just worked for me like so much, and the fact that they were able to make it in this engine just be completely combat-less is just like astounding.
Yeah, I'm checking it out, and dialogue boxes look like RPG Maker, but
Mm-hmm.
everything else, not really, I would say.
Mm-hmm. And trying to think if there's any other one game that I have been always like trying to keep an eye on and just like see where they've been doing. Actually, two. One is A Void Remains Upon Her Heart, which is a bullet hell roguelike that just like I have no idea will ever be released. They just keep adding more and more to it. And then there's a Time Break Chronicles, which, despite the look of it, is not RPG Maker. It's a developer-made engine, and it just seems like I don't even know how to describe it. It's like this amalgamation of as many like JRPG elements as one could fit into a game.
Right. I see there's a pattern here. It seems
Mm-hmm.
like from what I'm checking these games. Yeah.
Yeah, again, like there's just so many of them. Like for people who are watching this, I had to swap to having a spreadsheet each year that I notate every game that I play that came out in it, just so that I can remember when it comes like time for December to talk about what my favorite games are from the year.
Yeah, I think I will have to start doing that as well. I mean, if I'm covering one game per day, that's 360 games. I mean, and it's like I'm not gonna make a video about 50 of them as well. So I will have to pick like top 10 or 20 probably that made the most impact, I would say.
Hmm. And it is that kind of nightmare when it comes to covering these games. That like, how do you fit all this time? Because again, like I'm sure you're well aware of, like you can't just be posting 20 videos a day on YouTube about indie games. One, YouTube will stop marketing or blasting out. Two, you'll just drive all your subscribers crazy. That here's a new indie game every 2 hours a day.
Yeah, I mean, you would need like a team of 50 people or something to do that probably.
Mm-hmm.
Even then, I'm sure some people would be able to do that, and they still don't, because I've never heard of such a channel, to be honest.
Yeah. To throw it over to you, then, I guess, are there any new or upcoming indie games that you've played or that you want to check out that you feel like could do with a good spotlight on?
Mostly I play demos, so I guess I can talk about them because some of
Mm-hmm.
them are just released or some of them are upcoming. So Petrichor, for sure, a game that I think it deserves its some spotlight because of its unique mechanics. I think
Mm-hmm.
any unique game in any sort of way, I think deserves at least a chance to be checked out.
Mm-hmm.
So Petrichor, um, and I'm trying to look at the videos I've made, and I think more games like Doki Doki Literature Club, for example. So, for example, I've played a game which was called A Happy Place. It's not new. I think it's a few years old, but it's one of those where it's like it's cutesy or normal, and then it becomes horror. I think those games are actually quite like terrifying. I think that's a very good genre of horror. Kiriko Pet, for example, was a game like this, which was quite big recently. Or recently, well, maybe a few years ago now, but that one, for example, also popularized that sort of virus, fourth wall breaking horror. So I would say something like that. I'm trying to think of anything else I've played. Um, any game that comes from Mike Klubnika seems good, and it's kind of new. So this is the guy behind Bookshot Roulette. Like when the
Mm-hmm.
Bookshot Roulette came out, it's been huge, and he somewhat recently made a game called Split, in which the whole game premise is that you play as a coder, so you have to code inside the game, and it's kind of difficult because of that. If you never coded anything, I've never
Mm-hmm.
coded anything pretty much. So it gets some. You need to get too used to it, but I think it's worth it for the short experience that it provides. For example,
Mm-hmm. And I guess that takes me to I think like one more like final question. I think at this point, when it comes to like covering like game demos specifically, that seems to be even more of a niche for a lot of YouTubers. Because when we're talking about a demo, oftentimes you have to either be like very focused. I know there's again a lot of like horror channels to just cover like whatever bill that gets sent their way. So when it comes to just playing demos specifically, I guess like what do you look for in terms of covering them? And I guess like how do you approach covering or talking about a game that you may only be seeing like 30 to 40 minutes of an actual game out of it?
so first, I kind of even if I decided on the game already, essentially, I do kind of check if there is enough gameplay. Like I will upload a 15-minute video if that's how long the demo is,
Mm-hmm.
but um, there still needs to be something to actually uh, cover essentially. I actually don't cover. I try to not cover very long games because then I would be like either uploading a 5-hour video or I would have to upload like 4 parts, which I did before. Some games I did make an exception. For example, I think Among the Sleep it was called.
Mm.
Um, Out of Sight. No, it was Out of
Oh.
Sight. Again, a game which also had unique mechanic in it. I was like, okay, I want to play through the whole thing. But in terms of demos, yeah, it's a matter of is the demo between 15 to 2 hours, let's say. If it's anywhere outside of that, I would probably not cover it. With some exceptions, maybe if it's like 2 hours something. I think there has to be enough inside the game to cover it. So, for example, I had a game which I covered, even though there was not much to it, because a developer approached me. So that's a thing also that happens. Like, because I do have Steam Curator page where I reviewed the games I've played on and off the channel. There's sometimes developers which are sending me the copy of the game and be like, it would be very nice to like if you play this, basically. So I'm like, who am I to say no? so I'm just nice that way, and it kind of doesn't matter what they send my way, I cover it, even if it's glitchy, even if there's barely anything to do, I still cover that. So I guess it's not that strict, I would say, to in terms of demos.
So do you do any like coverage of any of like the festival showcases that we see on Steam?
No, actually, no, I haven't done anything like that. No.
Okay.
I was thinking like because we've talked before that I kind of don't want to lock myself in any kind of type of content, even though at the moment it is kind of locked. Like, well, it's not. I can do anything, but like I've been doing playthroughs and demo reviews and stuff like that. But for example, I don't know, covering top 3 best games from a Steam festival of something would be a type of content that I would not mind recording and uploading, for example.
Just good luck picking all those games like I've had to do for each festival.
How many games on average are there in like a one festival?
Easily like several hundred, maybe even like
several hundred. Okay.
For like if we're talking about Next Fest, that's at least like I think that could be at least close to 1,000.
Right.
Yeah, the smaller festivals may be a little bit more self-contained. Some of them don't even have like a demo section, so I can safely like ignore those. But there's a lot of them.
Right.
All right. So I think with that, we can probably wrap things up for the chat. This has been kind of relaxing and nice. I'll just have a discussion about playing games rather than on a heavy design topic. So I guess like for like you and your channel, if people, I guess like first off, do you have any social media you want to mention? I'll include, of course, link to your channel down below, but anything, Blue Sky, Twitter, X, whatever.
At the moment, I only do YouTube and the Steam Curator page. That's something I want to grow as well, I think, because that's a very good place to like just type about games for me. So just I think it's like a group, and then you have to go into like curators, and I guess you can search up there. I've never actually tested the feature that much. But yeah, so I'm Indie Enjoyer there as well. So that would be the only social media I use for my channel.
Okay. And as you said, like developers, if they're interested in you checking out their game, they can reach out to you through, I guess, like the creator program, or I'm sure you have an email on your YouTube channel that they can get in touch.
Yeah, there should be a business email basically on my YouTube channel, or just contact me directly through the Steam Curator page. I think that's pretty much how every single dev found me and gave me a game to try, pretty much.
Okay. All right. So I guess like from your side, any final questions, anything you want to ask me before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think that's all. I mean, there's if I prepared, there probably would be like 30 questions, but I mean, it has to end some time, right?
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, with that, I think we'll wrap things up for this chat. So, if you're interested in checking out Indy's channel, there'll be a link to that down below. If you're looking for someone to cover your game, you have 2 people right here who'll be more than happy to check it out. So be sure to get in touch either way. And as I said at the start, if you are a developer working on a game, or you just want to go on to chat about game dev or any part of the process, get in touch with me any which way that you can. If, of course, be sure to subscribe to both our channels, buy all the many copies of my books, and I think that does it for me. So anything that you want to say from your side to take us out?
I just want to say thank you for watching. Thank you for having me here. It was actually quite fun talking about indie games. Someone who's like very knowledgeable about them as well, and from behind the scenes with devs and such. I've never had opportunity to talk to someone like that, so that's been fun. Yeah.
All right, not a problem. So with that, thank you so much for tuning in. Come back for discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where some there are in science of games. Until our next chat, have a great night.